Mic check. 1, 2.
Tom, use your word.
Hey, you.
That's original freedom.
How's my hair?
Fucked up as usual.
Yeah, good. Oh,
just the way I like it.
Boom.
Yeah, it's like, yeah.
Well, we're right back fucking on cue like we never been apart. Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Original Freedom Podcast. Super happy to be back sitting down with Tom and Nate. It's the first time the three of us have been together in how long?
3 months.
Yeah, a few months.
Yep.
Been out on the road a lot, like everybody else is, burning it down, working. That's
Working
it.
solid.
Planting the seeds and doing what needs to be done. And that tees us up really for a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Today's show is going to be on basically Tom and I sharing our experience around our entrepreneurial ventures, which at some points have been together and some points have been separate. Couple different industries, a lot of failures, a lot of big successes as well, and really just going into this with the intention of, as always, giving you every aspect of what we've experienced, which is what we stay in, what we learn from it, and how things have worked out for us, which we know doesn't mean it's right for everybody. There's a million ways to dive into an entrepreneurial journey. Some people have their day job, so to speak, and start a hustle on the side and give that time to grow on its own and work themselves out of their day job. And then the other version is essentially just having a vision, knowing where you're going to go, having no fucking idea how you're going to get there, and risking damn near everything to make it happen, which is what we have the most experience with. So if you've, whether you're had a job forever, leaving high school wanting to be an entrepreneur, leaving college wanting to be an entrepreneur, definitely will get some experience that at a minimum will help you think through your process and why you're doing how you're doing it. And most of all, I would say hopefully you get super laser focused on where you're going and give a damn about how passion will take you there. So the entrepreneurial experiences of the Spooner brothers is what we're going with, and I'll let Nate guide us because he does it so well.
Okay, so your guys' first business together, how did this come about?
Our first business together, well, we started out together from the beginning, essentially.
Yeah, we started out together. We're working for another company, but the company itself was an entrepreneurial
absolutely.
effort.
We were.
So even though we, went to work for this company, it was just a group of entrepreneurs basically. So,
yeah, I think we were number like 5 and 6 or something in.
Yeah, so that was a big learning point for us. The number one learning point from that, as far as like, get a job working for guys and working for somewhat of I can't think of the word. Brand new company.
Startup?
A startup. Yeah, those words. A startup organization. One of the big takeaways from me was the false sense of security. That was kind of like as far as lessons learned in this business venture. It was like, hey, we're solid. You know what I mean? Like there's this. I even had the feeling of like security because I was presented with an opportunity of like, hey, going to work with a guy, basically on a pure entrepreneur effort. With my own money kind of deal, or, hey, working for this company. Obviously, Scott being there was the main reason why I wanted to go. But personally, it was, I had this sense of like, okay, I'm safe, like I'm secure in this environment, which was the big deal and which was our first big lesson learned. Not true. Or what we like to refer to that as a delusion. A false belief or a belief in a lie.
Actually, I think it was a psychotic belief in a lie that security was going to be there. Yeah, because I left when I got out of the Army. We joined a startup, like Tom said, and this is all around lessons learned, because I can tell you as hard as the lessons learned was for this, because for me it was actually I got fired from that company, and it was also a total blessing. At the time, I would have told you otherwise. Just pure emotion and fear, because to Tom's point, there's a CEO, there's a website, there's a plan, there's all this enthusiasm. There's stock, there's hey, $100,000 salary, some health and medical, all this stuff. Yet I don't care where it is you're coming from, if it's from a large corporation, if it's from the military, if it's from a government job, doesn't matter where. If it's a large umbrella organization, there is if they tell you you've got a salary, aside from getting fired, you're going to make it. The health and medical is going to be there. So Tom and I walked into this, or I walked into it first, and then 6 months later or so, Tom got out and came in, and they had all those things. There's a CEO, there's a president, we've got this much funding, blah blah blah, and then the next thing you know, my phone rings and it's like, hey, I'm going to be a little bit late on pay this month. Well, then the next month we're going, hey, can we, any way you can float this month, right? And what we were realizing and having to learn on the spot was like, hey, this isn't some massive pool of other people's money anymore.
Like IBM or
right. Yeah, so, Cisco, where whatever you're doing, the military, it doesn't matter. When cash flow slows down, everyone is affected in a small, entrepreneurial venture. Also learned a lot about everything from raising capital, funding rounds, what angel investors are, what VC money does and looks like. A lot of positives came from that because it had a lot of West Coast influence in the Silicon Valley area. Yet at the end of the day, the phone call did come in and everything was gone. Everything was over in a moment. So, and I had no net, no benefits, no retirement check, nothing, just boom. In fact, I was sitting in this house in the kitchen when the phone came in. And I remember crying like a freaking little boy because I had at the time was married, mortgage, 2 kids, 2 truck payments, and nothing. And the learning there was that, hey, security isn't real. The only security that exists is what I created. And at that point afterwards, it's going to be what Tom and I created. And that if I was really going to do this, it had to be on my own, without like understanding. Yeah, no one's going to put a check in your bank this month, Scott. You've got to go. You're going to eat what you kill.
Yep.
And I remember very vividly. My ex-wife, wife at the time, looked at me and she's like, "Well, you're going to go get like a job, right? Like that security, And I was like, "Hell no." Yeah. It was the immediate, like Tom and I walked out back and said, well, what are we going to do now? Yeah. And it was like, well, we're going to build a company. Yeah. And that's where our venture together pure began.
Yeah. And another thing that I was confronted with as far as in the entrepreneur effort and what it takes to kind of be successful right out of the get-go when we started working for that company, it wasn't, again, it was entrepreneurial-ish. Usually you take a job, it's got a fixed pay, it's got a duty description, expectations, all that kind of stuff. I mean, we had that as far as my expertise, what I was really good at. It's like, but he says, well, what do you want? Whenever it comes to pay, whenever it comes on the road time, when it comes to all that stuff. Well, for the first time in my life, I was like, well, I don't know. And my point with that is like, hey, what am I worth? Like, what is my time worth? What are my efforts worth? Because again, it was a new venture of like, I get to decide now, versus, whether it was being in the military or any other job, it's like, hey, this job description equals this amount of pay in this organization. Yep. So you might negotiate your price slightly, but they give you a starting point. And so here I was, never having done that before, and this guy was telling me, like, hey, what do you want? No point of reference, so it's like, do I go too low? Do I go too high? You know what I mean? Like, what, it was brand new, so I really had to do a lot of research in the market space that I was going into and seeing, hey, what were guys getting paid and what were their qualifications and that stuff, because I didn't want to overinflate it, you know what I mean, and come up with some bullshit. And also a big thing for me was not undercut it. Yep. You know what I mean? Because not really knowing, that's what a lot of people either extreme one way or the other, like ask some astronomical thing that they're not really worth, or ask something way too low, you know. So I just went through that exercise of going like, hey, what do I believe that I'm worth at that time based off my experiences, which was zero, and then and what do I need? Like, hey, this is, so at the end of the day, you know, if we're making millions of bucks for these people, I don't care because I'm getting what I need, because it was brilliant on his part, you know what I mean? And like Scott said, we had a lot of negative experiences with this particular company, but there's no regrets. It's not a negative experience. You know, there's wonderful lessons learned at it. I mean, we were super pissed off at the time. You know, don't get me wrong. You know, like way. And took
with a
years
lot
to
less
get over.
therapy too.
Yeah, way less therapy. It was a little dangerous. But anyway, it was a lot. I mean, all of our, you know, I mean, just like it's all perceptions, all what I choose to believe at that time. Like, hey, I'm going to take this lesson learned and learn it and then move on. But I guess I was just trying to talk about a little bit of figuring out like, hey, what am I worth? You know, and that was a big thing, because as an entrepreneur, like, you're going to have to charge people, right? You go in there, you brief them, you give them your elevator pitch. It's like, hey, here's who I am, what I'm doing, this is what I can do for your company, and this is how much it's going to cost. You know, it sounds very simple, but like, hey, how do you maneuver that? And that was took a lot of research, a lot of introspection, a lot of stuff that I needed to do.
Yeah, figuring out what you're worth is super complex. Back to it's simple to do the salary thing. What are you going to sell? Is it a product? There's some areas where this is very simple, so to speak. If you're going to sell a product, that there's a market space established, there's known price points.
Yeah, we were selling a service,
right? And so I think it's
true, great point.
Very, very different from pricing a product versus pricing something that's intangible. And when you're pricing the intangible, and figuring out what that is worth, well, it's worth whatever someone's willing to pay for it, right? And we have primarily sold services, our whole venture, whether it was tactical training services, whether it was explosives consulting services to nuclear power plants, whether it was consulting service to organizations, service, right? So we're selling things that have an output that's essentially predicated on how well these people receive our information and then actually do what we ask them to do. Deliver, right? And it's very interesting, people that walk out of secure, and I do use an overarching statement like people in this case, because people get a thought in their mind that if they were worth $150,000 in corporate America or at a big corporate job, that they can walk into a startup and tell that same person they're worth $150,000. Well, at the end of the day, you're worth what you can bring in revenue plus about 30% to cover your overhead. These are the things that people, you know, that we learned, you know, hard lessons together. The first time we ran payroll, I'll never forget it. I ran payroll for me and you. It was a red banner day. It was like, holy shit, we started a company.
We're actually getting paid.
We actually getting some money. And I ran payroll, and I had just the amount of money that we needed to both, you know, make whatever small sum it was that time to pay the bills. And it was through ADP, and I remember being on the phone with them, learning how to go through it, and I had the exact amount. And she's like, well, yeah, you know, you need another $4,000 in there. I'm like, for who? You know, she's like, well, for the government, for payroll taxes. Once again, like, what the hell's that? Right? So it's like, I have to pay the government to pay me and Tom? Yeah. Holy shit. Okay, this, you know, and
we got a shorter paycheck then.
Yeah, it did. We had to short our paychecks to pay ourselves. That's a learning point. All these things that just are handed to folks and to me for many years, when it comes time to doing it on your own, when you know, it's just totally the game-changing moments. And Tom brought it up. You know, it's one thing to you can call it other people's money, house money, but at the end of the day, if it's not in your bank account, decisions with financial decisions become very simple. Versus whenever you're playing with your money. When I started playing with my money,
there's a finite.
There's a finite pool. It goes empty quick. You go. I went negative fast. There's not always, for me anyway, there was zero banks willing to give a guy that had no college degree, was an ex-Green Beret, who had a vision of starting a consulting company, a loan.
Yeah.
Wouldn't happen. There's no pro forma that can put together. I've got a vision. I've got a dream. You can't put a metrics on it. They don't know what the return is. So there's no loan. So I could have easily said at that point, well, it can't be done. Well, credit card companies give $20,000 at a pop. I can get 5 of those. I got $100,000 at 25%. Once again, what was I willing to invest to make it happen? Because that's what it was, and knowing worth, bringing it back around, people just overlay their old salary with what they're worth as an entrepreneur, and it doesn't work that way.
Correlate.
Fucking devastating for some. I had a dear friend of mine who was looking to come and do some business, and I said, what do you think? He says, I'm $1,000 a day guy. I said, okay, who's paying you that? And he kind of had like, damn, dude, why'd you have to do that to me? I was like, because it was done to me.
Yeah.
And his answer was, no one. I said, I know what my daily rate is now, and I can tell you that because people are willing to pay it. That's right. So things, in any type of service-based market where you're expert, if there's expertise that's coming to the game, things are intangible. It's like intangible. Well, they could be worth tens of millions, or they could be worth nothing. The question is, what do you believe? Because belief ties another thing. Belief drive behaviors, and as Tom said, until I was willing to say this is what I'm worth as a consultant in the private sector to executives, and if you won't pay this, I'm walking away. Mm-hmm. It took a long time to get there. Long time. They told us when we started our venture, many successful people said 5 to 7 years before you even know if you're going to make it. And I remember
we didn't
thinking,
even understand that.
Yeah, and I remember thinking, you have no fucking idea who I am. And they had every idea who I was. Another guy that didn't know what he was doing, and they were right. And we're in year 10.
Yeah, and that brings another point of who to take advice from.
Yeah.
As far as, things that we've learned along the way is, who I am seeking advice from has to correlate with what it is that I'm trying to do. For example, if I'm asking a CEO of a large corporation, who's super successful, right? In that vein, like, man, what did you do? How did you do it? Wow. How can I do it? Meanwhile, that's a kind of, and I'm just going to use these words as kind of corporate, meaning like a large company, with all that stuff, and then an entrepreneur effort. But it's if I'm taking that advice from a corporate CEO as far as like how to do it, and I'm using my own money as an entrepreneur, there may be some good principle information, but not a how-to.
Is that hot?
I told you that was going to be hot, Scott. Before we got.
I just burnt every taste bud in my mouth.
There's no more I can do.
I didn't believe you. He didn't take your advice.
Holy shit. God bless. I'm sorry.
Folks, I told him. I told him about this, but
I got advice and I didn't listen to it. That steam rolling off this coffee is hot. Shit. I'm sorry, bro.
That's okay. I'll bring it back in.
But take us back into who you take advice from matters.
Yes, see, the perfect example. Matters.
You'll have to excuse my voice the rest of the podcast.
Yeah, so again, just correlating it, like, hey, if I'm looking for entrepreneur information, I need to find that person out, who has went through that path.
I think your experience being in bootstrapping, that kind of stuff early on, is it fair in saying that you've learned along the way and the people that you've worked with and that kind of thing, that as far as like, not an easier way, but another way to make money is with money? And as far as going out and gathering investors and that kind of thing and doing more of a capital strategy, what have you guys learned and picked up along the way? I mean, Scott, I know just in the kind of the circles that you've run in and that kind of thing, and Tom being a big part of raising capital for Warrior Star Foundation and that kind of thing.
Right.
What's the importance behind that, and just the kind of the difference in going that type of a way?
I'll start off by saying is, to me, equity is either overvaluated or undervaluated. It's kind of like explosives. People expect them to do way more than they can, or they totally fucking obliterate something they thought was going to do very little. And when you talk about raising capital, and to your point, I don't have physical experience in this. We've had bridge loans upward of $100,000 before, which is a simple interest loan to get us through on a PO that's coming in, so to speak. Yet I do have experience in, or Tom and I both, giving away a piece of the company, so to speak, way too early.
Yeah.
And also, and I'll bring us back to the vein that you took us in. For us, we always had to know that it was more important for us to keep our vision clean than it was to bring in other people's money and give them a say and a seat at the table on what it was we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And to me, the times that, at least in my group of entrepreneurial friends and some uber successful, you have to be aware of understanding what your needs are. And if you're in a business or setting up a business that is going to require, for example, manufacturing, distribution, massive sales of products, where if you're going to create this demand that you have to have a mechanism in place to have the supply, created, you may have to go get a couple $1 million, like to do it on your own. Put it this way, there's times I believe it's stupid to take money, and there's times you're stupid not to take money. And you either want to figure out if you want all of nothing or part of something, as the other way of looking at that goes. And for us in services, we have it also is going to be based on your exit. If there's a predictable exit, if you're entering, let's say you're building an IT company right now, it's predictable that there's some big conglomerate that can easily consume you in 3 to 5 years. So you put that plan together. You're selling something that can be put into a spreadsheet and put it in a pro forma that spits out a cool number that investors like to see in a market space where this is happening. Well, then, yeah, I've seen people go get $5-7 million with the intention of sometimes giving up 60-70% of their company to get a few $1,000,000 down the road. Much different than having a passion-based entrepreneurial venture, whether it's consulting, speaking, training, development, that you're going to go provide this. There's not a lot of people aside from angel investors, which is, to me, I interpret that nothing more as really friends and family that are willing to take a risk on you, a lower risk, right? And without giving up any equity in the company. Maybe it's on a 5-year note, or it's convertible debt that they can convert into equity. If it looks like your company's going to sell in the future, they can either get their money back or take the equity. And to me, that's actually the fun part of the entrepreneurial side of the house, is structuring deals with people that are really intently based on performance. Because back to other people's money versus your own, and then quite honestly, I've yet to be in a position where I want to take on the responsibility of taking that much money from someone else just yet.
On the hook.
To be on the hook for that money, right? So yeah, I have not experienced raising capital. I've read books about it. I've been part of it. Our first company, we did raise a few $1 million. I didn't. The CEO did. But I did get to learn a lot about it. And the only thing I would say is, well, an absolute example, back to understand who you take advice from. Tom and I drove up to Washington, D.C. about 8 years ago to sit down with two very successful gentlemen. One's a venture capitalist, and the other one was just a very successful older gentleman who's the CEO. And to summarize what we drove up there for was to listen to some venture capital experience tell us, look, here's the deal.
Here's what you need to do.
This is what you need to do. The minute you can get funded, get it and flip it as fast as you can, so to speak. The other guy looked at us, said, grow it slow, do it on your own.
Keep it forever.
Keep it forever. Both of them multimillionaires, very successful, two different mindsets, and we didn't do either one.
Yeah, because they didn't align with, back to your point of, it's like, hey, gather all the intelligence, gather all this really good advice, but at the end of the day, you have to take all that advice and put it into your own, because you have to follow your own passion, your own idea, and how you want to go about conducting that business. Which may not, like in that example you just brought up, like, didn't align with what we wanted to do.
Sure.
But again, it was experience-based information that they were giving us, and it was priceless. It gave us points of reference to, like, okay, well, we can go this route, take money and do it. You can bootstrap, do this. It's like, hey, what do we want to do? You know what I mean? And that kind of piece. Because do we want it to be a legacy company, or do we want it to be something that we build and then sell off? You know, because those are two totally different strategies.
Yep.
You know what I mean? As you move forward. So just getting clear on, you know, what it is that we want, you know what I mean, and what it is that we're trying to do, and then begin executing that plan. You know, so it kind of comes back to normal stuff, right? Gather all the information that you can possible, come up with a clear mission, a clear vision, a clear end state, you know, legacy or sell, you know, kind of deal, and then execute your own plan, and you will learn along the way.